Welcome to A Twice Told Tale, Episode 4. This week, we look at a number of additional parallels between aggadot and stories in Tanach, including the story of the golem, the emperor and Rav Tanchum, and the famous story of Rav Kahana going to Eretz Yisroel. We also began to look beyond the confines of the pattern to see examples which break or exceed the pattern, including the stories of Rav Hiya's wife, Yehudit, and King Shapur and Shmuel. Thanks for joining us. If you find the material here interesting, I hope you'll consider sharing it with a friend.
Okay. In that vein, we are going to get started. We will do a hopefully very brief recap of what we've been through so far in the first, I think it's 3 installments. So the underlying thesis that we're trying to explore is the idea that in the aggadot and in not overtly in the aggadot, Chazal take as a guiding principle in creating these stories the idea that whenever possible, try to incorporate themes from Tanakh in the stories that they're telling in the aggadot. And so
they can.
They can, and when they can, they do. And what we're trying to do is to see the length and breadth of that. What kinds of stories include the retelling of Tanakh, when, how, and why. And we started by first differentiating between what is halacha and what is not halacha, and everything that's not halacha is aggadah. And then we talked about the different kinds of aggadot. There are stories that are there to fill in missing parts from the tale in Tanakh. So you have Vayomar Kain el Hevel Achiv Vayi Biotam Basadeh, right? So Kain says to Hevel, and then the pasuk doesn't tell us what he said. So the Medrash comes and fills in what were they arguing about. We have stories about the lives of different people, the stories of Rav Kahana, etc. And then we have just story qua story, and that's where we wanted to dig in a little bit more and find within those stories examples of how the story itself, even though it's not necessarily so readily apparent, is still referencing themes from Tanakh. And the first example we gave was Nakdimon Ben Gurion, that the sun stood still for him the way it stood still for Yehoshua. So that was a very explicit example. We contrasted that with Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi and his handling of a criminal, which was similar to Sheva ben Bichri, and we said that there, it's not that the theme was from Tanakh, it's that you couldn't understand the story without its reference to the halacha that was exhibited in Tanakh. Yes, so far so good. Then we went into Chizkiyahu and Ben Azai and tried to see some comparisons between the two of them. Who else did we cover? Yonah and Nicanor, right, with the large sea creature swallowing something up and then spitting it out. And then we went into biographical comparisons. So we saw comparisons between Yosef and Rav Yochanan, between Shimshon and Rebbe Meir, and I think, and Naomi and Elisha ben Avuya. Those were our biographical comparisons, and this week we get some audience participation, but first we get a quote from F. Scott Fitzgerald. The test of a first-rate intelligence is the ability to hold two opposite ideas in the mind at the same time. So for the next few examples, what I'd like to do is give you the story from the Gemara, and then ask you what it might be referencing within Tanakh. And the first one, I tried to start us off on an easy one because we actually discussed this way back in the Bereshis series. The Gemara tells us about the creation of a golem. And it says as follows: Rava bara gavra, shadra l'kamei de Reb Zera. So Rava created a man, and he sent the man over to Reb Zera. Hava kamishtai bahadei. Reb Zera was trying to interact and have a conversation with this person that Rava created. Lo hava kamahaderle, and the person, the creature, was not able to respond and have a communication with Rava. Amar le min chabrayat. So Rava says, you must be from the group, from the Chevra of the Chachamim, Hadar la'afarecha, return to your dust. So I'm going to open this up to you guys. What could that be referencing from Tanach? Any takers? Creation. There you go. Very easy, straightforward. We set you up. Okay. Now let's go to something maybe a little bit harder. This is.
It wouldn't necessarily be saying that unless you're alluding to the fact that he is then taking the divine attribute. Are you trying to say that he is therefore trying to be God?
Right. It's showing. That's exactly right. It's showing that the ability to create goes beyond just HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but you man cannot create to the level that HaKadosh Baruch Hu can. You might be able to. There's like the story with the Hindu. Technology advances to the point where they say they call God down and say, we want to show you how far we've progressed with our technology. We can take a clod of dust and using nanotechnology, we can transform it into a person and it can do X, Y, Z. And God says, that's great, but get your own dust, right? Like you can progress to the point where you might be able to create this golem, but he can't have a he can't speak, he can't communicate, which is what a human being is. In Bereshis, you have Vayipach Ba'apa of Nishmas Chaim, and Onkelos says over there that it's Ruach Mamala, that he's a speaking spirit. He's able to communicate, and here he's not, and therefore Hadar Lafarecha, you're going to return to the dust that you started out as, which is what Adam ends up doing. Good. It's not going to be a one-to-one parallel, but it has the elements.
If you want to call it has the elements, it has the elements. But I would think it's more along the lines of he's trying to teach a moral lesson.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look deep into the time he was writing to and why he would be saying a comment like that, that would be, I would say, a greater understanding of where he's coming from to make that statement than to bring it back to the creation story of the Bible.
For sure. I think that the purpose of these stories is not to reference Tanach. I think the references to Tanach that we find are elements within the story, but they're not necessarily the purpose of the story. Is that fair?
I think you can find a reference to Tanakh in most anything. So I think the statement of there's a reference to Tanakh. Yeah, you could find a reference to Tanakh in most situations. The breadth and of human interaction with the divine and with people is such that no matter what story you're going to find, you're going to be able to find some correlation there too.
Right. So the question is going to be: is it correlations that you're finding, or are there correlations that seem intentional and built into the story because they want you to find those parallels? Let me give you another example. You'll tell me if it's resonating with you. This is a Gemara in Sanhedrin on Daf Lamed Tes Amar Aleph, and it says as follows: Amar le Kesar l'Reb Tanchum. The emperor says to Rabbi Tanchum, Tol haven kulon la'ama chad. Let's all become one people. Amar lechaye. So Reb Tanchum says, great idea, but there's only one problem. Anan the mahalinan lo matzinan mehave kavasaichu. We who have been circumcised, we can't be like you. Asun mahalisu v'have kavasan. You, meaning you and your people, should circumcise yourselves, and then you'll become like us. Amar le memar Shapur ka'amris. So the emperor says, okay, you make an excellent argument, but there's only one problem. Mihu kol dizache lemalka lishadyuha lebebar. Anybody who bests the king in a debate, a conversation, they have to be thrown into the lion's den. Shadyuha lebebar, so they throw him into the lion's den. Poor Rav Tanchum, v'lo achluha, and the lions don't eat Rav Tanchum. Amar lehahu mina. So a certain, we'll say a heretic. He says, "Hi delo achluha mishum delo kafin who the reason that the lions didn't eat him is because they've been well fed and therefore they weren't interested in a meal. So what did they do? So they threw this heretic into the lion's pit instead, and the lions ate him up instantly, indicating that it wasn't true. They were in fact very hungry, but it was a miracle that tanchum did not get consumed. So what would you say are the either the one or the more than one examples that we are pulling from Tanakh for this? Okay.
Okay, and you've got Daniel.
Kivshan Shel Asian Daniel. So can you be more specific? Where do we have Daniel here?
They want to throw him into the
Right. They threw Daniel into the lion's den, and he wasn't eaten. Right. And then they came and took him out, and they threw in the people who had accused him. Any other stories from Tanakh?
When we first started, I think of Shem and Hamor.
Exactly right.
You got that too, yeah.
Yeah.
That's the first part.
Right. The first part
the
sounds.
second part, I was thinking.
I would say that's exactly right. So I would that's my reading of this story as well. You have two stories from Tanakh that the thematic elements are there, I think, pretty overtly.
I think Haran also died.
Who died?
Haran,
Oh yeah.
after Avram didn't.
Yes, correct. Okay. That was story number 2. Are we ready for story number 3? This is Bava Kama.
But you didn't go into the story at all, and the moral lesson that's really going down there.
Yeah, for sure. We can pull apart each story and try to figure out what the purpose of the story is for us as an audience. But
I don't think it's meant for us as an audience. I think it's meant for the audience who the story was being related to.
Okay.
Okay. If the Aggadah is being told to a clientele who needs to hear a certain narrative, and the narratives are being related. Are there, elements that could be seen to be biblical in nature? Yes. Are there fanciful stories that probably never took place in any manner, shape, or form? Yes. But it's coming to teach a lesson to the people who need to hear the lesson. Whether it's we're going to throw the Christians into the lion's den, and that's okay, or whether you got to look into who the audience, who the Aggadah was written for and about. And I think without knowing that element of it, you're missing a good part of the Aggadah.
For sure. I think that's a very fair comment. And I think what you're saying is true. The Aggadah has a...
And even with that, by the way, I don't think you get complete... I mean, look at Chelek. Oh, my gosh.
Yes, for sure.
It's all over the place. And
for sure.
There are lessons that are being learned from it in multiple levels to different people. But I think for the most part, it was written not necessarily... definitely not to be taken at face value, and to be understood on multiple facets, but mostly meant to teach a moral, ethical lesson that we in 2023 aren't necessarily seeing because we are not familiar with a lot of times
the cultural milieu and
the historical milieu what's going on.
True.
What's very funny today, you will get a chuckle out of it because of the politics of today. 5 days later, isn't funny at all.
Right. No, for sure. You have to know the context and the history. I agree with you. But what I'm trying to point out is that when Chazal wrote these stories, it seems to me that they went out of their way to tell them in a way that would allow the audience hearing it to think about those stories in Tanakh, not just to get the message. Maybe the message is exactly what you said. We want to throw the Christians into the lion's den. There's lots of ways to tell that story. The way that they chose to tell it was using language or themes that make us think of other parts of Tanakh. And I think that's done intentionally. And hopefully when we get to the last year, I'm going to give you my take on why they would do that instead of just tell the story qua story. Why do you have to try to pepper in those elements of Tanakh. Is that fair?
I think it's important to pepper in again, you're speaking to an audience. You're speaking to an audience, and the audience, for the most part, that they're speaking to knew the stories of Tanakh.
Yes.
They knew the stories of Tanakh, and they
For
would
sure.
know the references of Tanakh, and they would pick up and more readily understand the moral ethical lesson that's trying to be transmitted with these Aggadah references. I would agree with that assessment that they're
Yeah, and you're layering more into the story by making those references than just getting your message out directly. Meaning, if all you wanted to say was, one day we'd really like to throw the Christians in the lion's den, you can say that directly. By telling it as this story and referencing stories from Tanakh, you are giving the audience who's hearing it more information as they pull it apart.
Correct, but it also leads to the very real reality, which is the way you're going to hear the story, and the way I'm going to hear the story, and the way Steve's going to hear the story, and the way someone heard it 100 years ago or 1,000 years ago is very different.
Yes. Fair. Okay. The next example, now that we had two softballs, might be a little bit harder, and it's a little bit longer, so you have to bear with me. This is Bava Kama Kuf Yud Zayin Amud Aleph, the story of Rav Kahana. Hahu Gavra, there was a man, Dahava Boy Achve Ativna Dechavre. So there was a tax. If you have a certain amount of straw, the Gentile government wants a percentage of it for tax purposes, and not every Jew kept their straw out in the open so that everyone would know how much they had. Some people might shove a little bit of straw under their bed so that they get taxed a little less. But there was a guy who was trying to rat out his friend regarding how much straw he had. Boy achve ativna dechavris. Fine. So also lekame de Rav. So this, the guy who wants to out his friend, he shows up by Rav and Amarle lo tichve velo tichve. So Rav says to him, don't divulge it. Make sure you do not do that. This double language. Don't do it. Don't do it. Amarle machvina umachvina. I am going to reveal it. I am most certainly going to reveal it. So that doesn't sit well with Rav's student. Yosef Rav Kahana Kameh. Rav Kahana, who's sitting there in front of Rav, learning from him, he sees this whole discussion take place and how disrespectful this person was to Rav. Shamte lekule mine. So he, it's a very interesting way of putting it, he dislodged his neck from him, meaning he broke the guy's neck, right? You don't talk to Rav like that in front of Rav Kahana. So, Kari Rav Aloe, so Rav applied the following pasuk to him. Banecha olfu shachvu berosh kol chutzos. Your sons have fainted. They lie at the head of all the streets. Katua michmer, like a antelope in the net. Ma tua zeh kivan shenafel b'michmar, just like this antelope, once it gets caught in the net, ein merachman alav. That's it. There's no more mercy on it. Af mamon shel Yisrael. So to the money of the Jewish people, kivan shenafel biyad ovdei kochavim, ein merachman alav. Once it falls into the hands of the non-Jews, they do not have mercy on him. What this means is, you did the right thing, Rav Kahana, by killing this guy, because if the guy had been allowed to out his friend for hiding his straw, the local magistrate wouldn't have just penalized him, it would have been a capital offense. So you saved Ruvain from being killed by the local magistrate by killing Shimon, who was going to divulge Ruvain's tax fraud, and therefore you are justified in your killing. Amar le Rav Kahana, ad ha'idna have Amar le. So Rav continues to speak to Rav Kahana, and he says, ad ha'idna have yavone. It used to be that the ruling nation were the Greeks. The lo kapte ashvichus davim. They didn't care what we Jews did internally, how we handled our business. If we felt the need to kill somebody as a penalty, the Greeks just wanted to make sure they got paid. But v'hashda ika parsoi. But now that we are no longer under Persian rule, under Greek rule, we are instead under the Persian rule. The kapti ashvichus damim. They don't allow you to execute people without their permission. So therefore, you Rav Kahana are now in trouble with the government for having killed this guy. The Ame Mardin, and they're going to say you're a murderer, and by murdering without our permission, you're rebelling against us. Kum sakla aradi Yisrael. So therefore, leave Bavel, which is under the Persian rule, and go to Eretz Yisrael. The Kibol Allah, and you're going to go, obviously, when you go to Eretz Yisrael, you're going to learn by the greatest sage of the land over there. The Lo Tikshe Rav Yochanan Shevashnim. Make sure that you don't ask Rav Yochanan any questions. Don't try to show Rav Yochanan up for 7 years. Make sure that when you get to Eretz Yisrael, you just go to yeshiva, keep your head down, let Rav Yochanan do his thing. Don't be a troublemaker for at least 7 years. Give Rav Yochanan sort of a running start. Lamachar asvua bedara kame kama kame de Rav Yochanan. So the next day, Rav Kahana, we skipped a little bit of the Gemara over here, but he shows up in Rav Yochanan's yeshiva. Amar shmaitza velo akshe. So they had prepared Rav Yochanan. They told Rav Yochanan, there's this lion who's coming up from Bavel, and boy, you better have your stuff ready to go, because he is going to knock you out of the water with all of his questions. So they seat Rav Kahana right up front. Sorry, bedara kama kamei Rav Yochanan. So they seat Rav Kahana in the first row. You were seated. The rows were based on prestige and how much knowledge you had, and so the best students are in the front row and the worst students are in the back. So they sit him directly in front of Rav Yochanan. See, Rav Yochanan says over his teaching. Rav Kahana is silent because he had agreed to take on this 7-year sabbatical from asking questions. Amar Shemaitza v'lo akshe. Again, he says over another statement, no questions. Anachte achuai shevei dare. So they place Rav Kahana. They realize, okay, maybe he's not such a lion after all, and they start heading him to the back of the room until finally he's 7 rows back from Rav Yochanan, and then the story continues from there. This is actually a very famous story, the story of Rav Kahana, and he ends up later starting to ask questions, and they move him back up the 7 rows, and Rav Yochanan is sitting on 7 pillows, and each time he asks a question and Rav Yochanan can't answer, they pull away one of the pillows until Rav Yochanan's on the floor. Okay, that is the whole spiel. Now, again, this is harder, but I'm curious if any of the elements here remind you of any of the stories that we have in Tanach. Yosef, interesting. How's this Yosef?
You've got the 7s.
What are the 7s with Yosef? Oh, the 7 years of famine and the 7...
You got the 7s there.
Okay.
You've got the Aggadah also, if you want.
Interesting. How's this the Aggadah?
The beginning of the story.
That he's going to kill him, right, and he saves him from being killed.
Right, and put something else there instead.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Okay, I hadn't seen that. I like that a lot. Stephen, what do you got? No. Okay, so what I will propose to you is there are elements of the Moshe story here. First, you have the symbolism of Moshe fleeing from Mitzrayim to Midian, right? So he kills another Jew. Moshe kills the Mitzri. He kills another Jew. He has to run away. Moshe comes to Midian where he meets Yisro. Yisro is the man with 7 names. He has 7 daughters, so you have the pattern there of 7 as well. Those are, I think, the elements that I was able to pull out from the story that reminded me of Moshe. I like the Yosef and the Aggadah references as well. Do we have time for one more? Yeah, let's do one more. Okay.
What's your point, though?
What's my point? So now we're back to my point is that there are elements here in the way the story is told that make us think of other stories in Tanakh, that you could have told the same story without those elements, and that they're there intentionally.
Again, what's your point, though?
Yeah.
You can comment also that the New Testament is a whole just the same thing as what you're saying there also. The miracles of Jesus were miracles that were performed in the Old Testament also. So it's
Yeah.
a repeat on there also. So
Yeah, I think
what's
that I think there's validity to that, and I think that was also done intentionally to show, okay, you had miracle X in the Old Testament, so you have X plus in the Christian Testament.
correct? But what's the point?
The
I
the
understand.
basic point is that is an
it
element
fun-
of storytelling. That's the basic point, and then hopefully we can layer some more onto that as to why that's an element of storytelling. But my first point is to show that just like this is something that we mentioned originally as well, there are rules to Aggadah. One of the rules in Aggadah is if you have a hero character um, in Tanach, make that hero character more heroic in the Aggadah, and if you have a villain character, make them more villainous in the Aggadah. So Esav comes home and he's tired. That's the pasuk in the Chumash, and Chazal say, what's he tired from? Oh, he's committing adultery, he's committing murder, right? The three major sins. That's not in the pasuk. Why? What? Maybe it's the opposite. Maybe Esav came home tired because he was learning in yeshiva. No, Esav is a villain, so we're going to make sure that he always comes across villainous. And the same thing goes in reverse. If you have a tzaddik in the Chumash, they're going to become even more righteous. So that's a principle of Aggadah. What I'm trying to point out here is another principle of Aggadah is when you can layer in elements of Tanakh in your story, do so. Okay. We'll do one more short one. What I'd like to do for the next couple examples, and we'll pick this up next week a little bit more, is show that just like we were talking about actually in the Christian Testament, besides having this basic pattern of reference Tanakh when you can, there are other rules to this pattern, such as either intentionally breaking the pattern or exceeding the pattern. And I'll give you one example maybe of each one of those. This is a story in Yevamos Daf Samach Hey Amud Aleph, very short as well. Yehuda v'Chizkiah te'umim havu. So there were these two brothers, Yehuda and Chizkiah, who were twins. Echad nigmarei tzurasa l'sof tishav, echad nigmar tzurasa l'tchilas shiva. Their mother was pregnant with both of them at the same time, but did not give birth to both of them at the same time. We know in the ancient world, some people could be born after 7 months, and others after 9 months. So the mother carried both twins, but gave birth to them at different times, one after 7 months and the other after 9 months. The mother's name was Yehudit, de Bithu de Rav Hiya. Her name was Yehudis, and she was the wife of Rav Hiya. Havalot Tsar Leda. Obviously, this is a very difficult thing. She didn't have to go through birthing once. She went through birthing one pregnancy, but 2 birthings, so it was very painful for her. So what did she do? She changed her clothes, she disguised herself, and she comes before her husband Rabbi Hiya. Amar, she says, Itza mefkadata apiria virivya, is a woman responsible for being fruitful and multiplying. Is that a commandment that a woman has to fulfill? Amar la lo. A woman is not responsible for that mitzvah directly. Azla ishtoye sama de akrasa. So she went and swallowed some sort of potion that made her sterile. Lasofigali milsa. So in the end, it became revealed what she had done. Amar la. So Reb Chia says to his wife Yehudis, Iko yaladit li chada karsa acharisa. If only you would have given birth to another batch of children, meaning the children that you bore me are so wonderful. It's chaval now that you won't be able to have another birthing. De Amar Mar Yehuda v'Chizkiah ache pazei v'tave achiusa. Because people would say that Reb Chia's daughters were twin sisters and they became matriarchs, and her sons became Torah scholars. So she bore very righteous children. So this to me is a breaking of the pattern that we've seen before, where the woman usually tricks the man in order to give birth to children. She's tricking the man in order to stop giving birth to children, right? We have Tamar who dresses up and tricks Yehuda. We have all of the examples that we saw in the Rus series. We have the daughters of Lot who trick their father so that they can give birth. We have Rus who dresses up and shows up in order to propagate again from the man. So here it's definitely referencing that pattern in Tanach of women who trick men in relation to bearing children, but it breaks the pattern in that she's there to trick the man in order to not bear children, rather than to continue propagating. One more, and we will stop, and that's the example of exceeding the pattern. This is a Gemara in Brachos, Daf Nun Vav Amud Aleph. Amar le Shapur Malka. So there is this King Shapur who we find all over the Gemara. He says to Shmuel, Amrisu de Chachmisu Tuva. You guys say that you're such big Chachamim. Emali, my Chazanai Bechalmoi. What am I going to see tonight in my dream? Amar le Chazesa to Asu Roma the Shavulach, the Tachnibach Kashyasa Berichaya de Dahava, Hahar Kule Yoma, Ula Urta Chaze. You're going to see that the Romans, this is what you're going to dream, says Shmuel, that the Romans will come, take you into captivity, and force you to grind date pits in mills of gold. So that's what he told him, and that's all that he thought about the whole day long, was what this expectation was. And because he thought about it all day long, and therefore at night he saw exactly what Shmuel told him he was going to see in his dream. So I would read this as exceeding Daniel. So the story in Daniel is Nebuchadnezzar says, tell me my dream, and then interpret it for me, which is one level greater than Yosef. Yosef has to interpret the dream. Daniel has to tell him what the dream was and then interpret the dream. And here Shmuel has to tell him what dream he's going to dream. Right? That's one more stage. You have to tell me before the dream even happened. So that's going one stage beyond Daniel, who was one stage beyond Yosef. That's taking the pattern and exceeding it. So we had breaking the pattern, exceeding the pattern, and next time we'll take a look at inverting the pattern.
Wow, you made it all the way through to the end of this year. Thank you. These series are a passion of mine, and a lot of effort goes into them. I'd be grateful for your help in spreading the awareness to others. If you're interested in joining us live, getting the notes, or asking a question, please message me on Twitter at Isaacson, ISAACSON. Thanks.